I'm going to be honest, I hated Fire Emblem Fates, all versions of it. So much so that I didn't even bother playing Echoes because I hated Shadow Dragon 2, so I was not up for another remake of a game from the NES era. Besides Echoes though, I've played every Western Fire Emblem game, and Radiant Dawn was the last one that really wowed me. Awakening was alright, and you already know how I feel about Shadow Dragon and Fates. So along came Fire Emblem Three Houses. It seemed to be going in a totally different direction to past titles, so I figured it was a good time to give the series another shot. I'm glad I did, because Three Houses, while not perfect, is definitely the best Fire Emblem game since Radiant Dawn. One of the major reasons for this is that the story feels very focused, whereas many games since Radiant Dawn, and even to an extent Radiant Dawn itself, have been kinda all over the place plot-wise. We're used to getting thrown in the middle of the war the moment that we start the game, but Three Houses takes the time to do a lot of setup, so by the time the main conflict arises, you have a more personal investment in it. The one negative of having a preamble of sorts, however, is that there ends up being a more setup than actual conflict. If they wanted to make the second act of the game a little bit longer, then the first act's length would be totally fine, but as it stands now, it's a little unbalanced. Perhaps this is done because the teaching mechanics have a little bit more purpose in the first act than the second. Those teaching mechanics are one of the major additions of Three Houses. You play as a new instructor at a military academy who is responsible for teaching the students the ways of various Fire Emblem staples, such as sword work and magic. This system also allows you to train your students in any area and reclass them as such. This method of reclassing units feels so much more organic than, say, Shadow Dragon. It actually makes sense why a student would be a different class than they started as. The school setting also introduces several other Persona-esque mechanics, such as the ability to explore the academy and participate in various activities with your students. Supports one-on-one conversations between two units that serve to characterize both of them, as well as to provide buffs when they're near each other in the field, was a thing in the series before this game, but it's propped up by new mechanics this time. Eating a meal with your students, for example, will build support points with them. These activities are pretty interesting in the beginning, but become a little bit of a chore as the game goes on, and as I mentioned previously, are almost entirely unnecessary in the second act. The students you start out with will be determined by which class of students, or house, you choose in the beginning of the game. The choice will also determine which story path you go down. There are 3 main story paths and 1 pseudo-secret one. They're not really wildly different than one another, but they all reveal different elements of the overall plot and state of the world, so the game is worth replaying to see the different paths. Though again, the length of first act, which is mostly the same in every playthrough, can get a little old in repeat plays. Earning support points with other students or leveling up specific stats and skills for your character can help you recruit students from other classes into yours. There are a few students in each story route that cannot be recruited, however. You're only going to be able to recruit a few new students in your first playthrough, but with the game's New Game Plus feature, allowing you to easily obtain support levels, you will eventually get to the point that you can recruit pretty much everyone the game will allow you to. If you're not familiar with the core Fire Emblem gameplay, it is an RPG that is split into various chapters, which are composed of turn-based strategy battles in which you command your units across the battlefield to take out enemy troops. This core gameplay is mostly unchanged in Three Houses. This may sound odd, but I am so thankful they brought back the weapon degradation system since Fates, because without the downside of weapons breaking in those games, they just balanced them by making them all terrible. Nosferatu has been returned to its former glory, even if it's once again a light spell instead of a dark spell. Speaking of spells, that is one of the changes Three Houses does make. Instead of using spell tomes that somehow break, mages just have a limited number of uses of their spells that recharge after each battle. This mechanic is nice because you don't really have to manage any equipment for your mages anymore. The game also introduces battalions, which essentially allow units to command a small army. This doesn't really affect gameplay too much besides giving the unit a stat boost and granting them a new type of AoE attack called a gambit. Gambits can really only be used once or twice a battle anyway, so they're mostly reserved for debuffing tough enemies. Units may also learn combat arts and abilities. Abilities have been around for a while, though the way they're implemented changes a bit from game to game. Here they're awarded when a unit has spent enough time as one class, or has reached a certain skill level in a particular area, such as getting plus 6 magic when initiating attack for mastering the mage class, or getting plus 4 dexterity for ranking up the unit's writing skill. Combat arts, on the other hand, which again are largely gained by skill level ups, allow units to strike with more power in general, or do more damage against a specific type of enemy. Some of these arts have more unique buffs, but for the most part, I actually found them kind of useless. The reason for this is that even if your character is fast enough to attack a unit twice in one turn, most combat arts will prevent them from doing so. So the damage buff you would get from the one strike doesn't compare to a strike at normal damage happening twice. Some combat arts are useful despite this, but they're pretty situational. Overall, the game combines a lot of the good aspects from past games while tweaking some of them, usually either for the better or for the negligible. The first act is maybe a little too long in comparison to the second, and the Persona-style elements kind of peter out towards the end, but it's a game that's definitely worth playing multiple times to see the different perspectives of this conflict.
Folks like us should stick together. As house leader, I'll do all I can to help you out. We can start by making time for more little chats like this.